Hey guys, I'm Lee Bratcher, I'm the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. I'm privileged to sit down with CFTC Commissioner Summer Mersinger. Commissioner Mersinger came to the summit last year and delivered a speech that I think a lot of people remember, a fireside chat on stage, and so we're grateful for that. We're here in DC on a beautiful day. We've just stepped away from the State of Crypto conference. So Commissioner Mersinger, people know about your role at the CFTC, but they probably don't know a little bit about your background. So if you would just give the audience a few minutes of your bio, your background, how did you make it to where you are today?
Yep, no, thank you, and I'm glad that we were able to do this and be outside. It's nice to get some fresh air. Just starting with my standard disclaimer that the views I express today are my own and they don't necessarily reflect those of the commission or my fellow commissioners. So with putting that aside, my background, it's a little unique, but it also fits very well with the CFTC. So I spent a lot of time working on Capitol Hill. I worked for Senator John Thune from South Dakota, which is my home state. I actually worked for him when he was a congressman as well. So it was, a lot of time learning the legislative process, learning how bills come together. My time before that, I actually grew up on a farm and a cattle ranch, so I have that agriculture background. When I was working in the Senate, I was handling financial services issues. So the CFTC is this unique place where agriculture and financial services merge to a certain extent. And so that was part of the reason I found this agency so appealing. I started at the CFTC working for former Chairman Heath Turbert. He brought me in to do his legislative affairs. And we worked hand in hand with our oversight committees, the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees, which I was very familiar with given my background. And we were just working on some updates to our authorizing statute, the Commodity Exchange Act. So I had an opportunity to really get into the kind of meat of our statute and get to know that a little bit better and get to know our different divisions. When Chairman Turbert left, I moved over to Commissioner Dawn Stump's office to be her chief of staff. Commissioner Stump and I knew each other from the Senate, but I got a different view into the agency. I really got a view from working in an individual commissioner's office, what that means, how that role works, and how to best approach that. While I was in Commissioner Stump's office, I was approached about an open commission seat that was going to be open soon. The process is very interesting. When you're not of the president's party, it's actually the Senate, the leader of your party in the Senate. So in this case, it was Senator Mitch McConnell who actually sent my name to the White House, and then I went through the nomination process at the White House, and had just an amazing opportunity to be confirmed with 3 other really well-qualified women. Wow. And it's the first time there have been 4 women commissioners at one time at the CFTC.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, so your background with agriculture and finance does, uniquely lend itself to making you a great candidate for the CFTC, and to be confirmed by the opposite party's president or the White House in that administration, and then even through the Senate, was probably not, because at that time the Senate was held by the Democrats, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So you had to have some serious, policy chops and serious technical chops for them to. This was not a partisan nomination.
Right.
So, congratulations are in order there. I know you're probably in your 3rd year now.
Well, so this is actually the term that we take over the term for the person who left the seat. So Commissioner Dan Berkovitz left, and there was only a year left on his term. So my term has technically ended. Our statute lets us stay on for a given amount of time. I was renominated by the White House in June.
Oh, great.
So I'm pending before the Senate Agriculture Committee again. And hopefully at some point, I'll move forward in the process. So I kind of get to do the process twice. This time I don't have my, 3 counterparts with me as for support, but I at least know what I've done this before. So hopefully I will be able to easily do it again.
That's awesome. Well, let's shift a little bit to the CFTC and what you guys do. Yep. Help us understand the regulatory authority between the CFTC, which is obviously commodities, derivatives, futures, et cetera. The SEC, which is securities, there's a little bit of gray area in there, isn't there, around spot markets for commodities? Is that right?
Yeah, well, especially in crypto, I mean, there are a lot of commodity spot markets where there's clear regulatory oversight. So I often use the example of cattle markets, which is one of our, kind of first markets. The agriculture complex, as we call it, those were really the first time that these markets evolved. It was the idea of delivering grain and taking a receipt for the grain that you delivered, and that's where derivatives markets started. So if you look at, whether it's grain or cattle, those cash markets, they have oversight. So, we at the CFTC don't go in and regulate the cattle auction houses, but the USDA does. Yeah. So they've got the jurisdiction there. Our jurisdiction is over the futures market that's based on that cash market. What's interesting about cryptocurrency is there's no one that's regulating the cash market for cryptocurrencies or digital assets. Right. There's no federal regulator. So where we can come in is if we spot fraud and manipulation. Our enforcement authority is broader than our regulatory authority, so we can bring an enforcement action. But that also has risks as well, because inevitably you end up kind of coming down with some policy decisions that really should be at the commission level or even at the legislative level. Sure. The SEC, their oversight is over securities, the raising of money, using these markets to create wealth. Our markets, a lot of it is based on hedging risk. So it's a bit of a different focus, but there are products that really start to look like a security and a commodity. And so we've got a history of working really closely with the other agency, with SEC, to lay out framework to say, where's the jurisdictional line here? Right. Where does this fall? And hopefully that's something we eventually do in the digital asset space. But right now, nobody has that regulatory oversight jurisdiction of the trading and day-to-day digital assets.
And there's two competing bills, one in the Senate, one in the House. The old market structure bill we now call the FIT bill, and of course Senator Gillibrand and Senator Lummis's bill on the Senate side. Let's take the House version, or the House bill. Yep. There's a definition in there around decentralization where assets can move from a digital asset security to a digital asset commodity. Of course, you guys have taken the view of the CFTC that there's only two digital asset commodities yet, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the CFTC has seemed, or the SEC has seemed to cede that point for the most part, and then they have different views on other of the assets that are less decentralized. How do you think, obviously that bill is still being developed in the policy circles and within the staff of these different committees. What do you think the decentralization metric should look like? I mean, that's a spectrum, but how do we measure that spectrum?
Yeah. I mean, getting that definition, creating clarity around that definition is really important. Because it is easy for someone to say we're running a decentralized exchange and have it be incredibly centralized and have a central kind of committee really running things. And so I think there needs to be some sort of definition to help just to prevent that the practice of people saying they're decentralized when they're clearly not. I don't know if I know the exact, exactly where that line should be drawn.
Nobody does.
Nobody does, but I think we can, work with stakeholders and try to come up with something reasonable between the two agencies. And, I do think there will be times that maybe something falls into one category and things change or, governance change and suddenly you are falling in the other category. So I think, a legislative solution that allows for that as well. We have that in swaps markets now, it's kind of these broad-based indexes and indices and things can go back and forth. And, we have regulatory, kind of delineation between the two agencies, so we can do that, and I think we could implement something similar in this case. But again, it's going to take some stakeholder engagement. Congress may punt that to us to a certain extent. They may say, we understand this, and you, SEC and CFTC, need to work together and figure that out. We can do that, but no, I don't think we're going to do that without Congress telling us to either. So I do think we need some sort of legislative push to get there.
Yeah. Well, if the bill passes, and hopefully passes the next couple of months, and if it doesn't, we probably have to wait till after the election, just given the way things will work and on the Hill. Say 18 months from now, we do have a market structure fit bill that is passed, or Senator Gillibrand Lummis's bill. How do you see that changing the CFTC's mandate, but also what it looks like?
Right.
Is that going to add staff? Is that going to add, it almost seems to add, you're going from an industry that's one of the core industries of global commerce, which is agriculture and commodities, from time immemorial to still being one of the most core industries in the world, to adding digital commerce. It's sort of a poetic transition. What is that going to do to the look and feel of the SEC?
Well, it's interesting because we do have our kind of roots in agriculture, and those were the first markets, but those are actually some of the smallest markets that we regulate now. The Treasury futures and futures on security indexes, that's where we see the most huge volumes. So we really are an agency that's overseeing regulating some of the most innovative markets. And so I think in that sense, if we are granted jurisdiction by Congress, I think we're well adapted, doing market regulation, global market regulation, and being on kind of the forefront of innovation. So I think we're well prepared to handle that. The resource question is always tough. We are appropriated by Congress, so I always say when people say, "What are you going to need for resources?" Whatever Congress wants to give us, that's what we need. And again, there's probably some expertise that we would like to have, bringing in the right personalities. But when you go back to the Dodd-Frank Act and how that shifted our jurisdiction, it didn't really shift our jurisdiction. It added a whole new, asset class onto our, regulatory remit, and we didn't grow at all. Wow. We had to figure out how to do that, with the staff and the budget that we had. In fact, for a few years after that, Congress cut our budget. So we know how to operate with new regulatory requirements, with a small staff, with limited resources. I do think, a lot of these legislative proposals, they recognize that, there probably needs to be more resources, and whether that's in the, maybe some industry fees or something like that, that could help. Yeah. But I think regardless, I'm confident we can figure it out at the agency, and, again, the resources, it's really up to Congress where we end up.
Well, the industry would support fees for the CFTC, certainly. And I think we would also support a stricter definition of decentralization. The majority of us would, right, in the industry, because we realize that this is an industry that's quite sensitive. When you're talking about money and financial services, we need to be held to a high standard. And so a strict definition of decentralized before you can migrate from a digital asset security to a commodity, I think is well warranted. And I think the fact that only 2 digital assets have achieved that thus far is telling of that. And so we're certainly supportive of that, and supportive of you and your efforts. I appreciate you taking some time to chat with us today.
Yeah, and it's great having to hearing from states as well, because it's easy, and I even forget to mention it, the states have been on the forefront of this. The states have been out there, managing this and trying to come up with licensing regimes before I think anyone in DC really understood what cryptocurrency was. And so it's great having states willing to participate at the federal level and help guide whatever we come up with, because again, you've been on the front lines, you know these markets, you know these players, and that helps us create a better system federally. So thank you for all the work that the Texas Blockchain Association has been doing in that, helping educate DC on how to approach these markets.
Well, thank you. It's the least we can do. Thanks for taking some time to sit down.
Of course.
On a beautiful day in DC.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Amy. Click over here to subscribe, click over here for more content, and we'll see you next time.